لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم إنا نسألك إيمانا دائما ويقينا صادقا وتحقيقا بحقائق المعرفة حتى نكون من أهل قربك ومحبتك ورضاك يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Imam Sawi's sharh on Jawhara al-Tawhid, we have reached line number 11. إذ كل من قلد في التوحيد إيمانه لم يخلو من ترديد. Omar, can you switch off the sound over there? The sound's on over there. Anyone who merely follows in their belief in divine oneness, their faith remains susceptible to doubt. This is a good example of why one needs to understand الدلالات اللغوية, right? Because قلد, right? قلد, right? What does قلد mean in the Arabic language? No, forget the applied, but the word قلد, right? What does it come from? Right? A qilada is something that's around your neck. So taqleed is when you have something around your neck by which you are. So an animal, yani in Hajj you make you when you're taking a camel with you on Hajj, the budna. So it's something you put around the neck that you are led by. Right? Because the active sense, فَعَلَ قَلَّدَ يُقَلِّدُ تَقْلِيدًا. So in that sense, of course, and that's why the roots are important, right? That a qilada is just something that's around your neck. It can even be jewelry, because something that's around your neck. But qallada it's as if, so but when used, like the word taqleed has very negative connotations in one sense. Why? Because it's as if, what is your relationship in a state of taqleed, right? Is that you've allowed yourself to put a noose around your neck and you're being led on by another. Right? So it has negative connotations, right? In that sense. But not necessarily. Right? Because in some, and that's why the same word can have very negative usages, and it's used in that sense. There are people, some of our attitudinally divergent brethren, who take serious offense to the notion of taqleed. Right? And many of them don't have the depth of thinking to even understand the dilalat of lugha, but for a lot of people, a lot of Arabs, the idea of taqleed has a very viscerally negative sense. They don't understand why, because the word has, right? It's like you put something around your neck by which you're being led. هذا مقلد. So imitate, right? But, so there's a negative range of meanings, right? But the other is the pure act of following another. Right? So taqleed has a very negative notion, which is that you don't know where you're going. You're just being led on by another. So there's a negative connotation to it. And then there's just a sense that you are following another. But it could be good or bad in accordance with who you're following, why you're following, how you're following, and to what end. Right? These are four things we would judge the act of following another. Right? Whom you're following, why you're following, how you're following, and to what end. Those are the 4 questions, right? Right? Whom, how, why, to what end, right? These are the 4 questions related to taqleed. If you appreciate that, taqleed in faith is problematic, because what is the point of faith? The point of faith is what you believe. So if we ask Sister Zubaydah that, why do you believe? Said, because Sister Yuman believes. So why are you following her? Because that's Sister Yuman. Because belief is something that's within you, right? So what if the person you're following travels? Now you lost contact with the person. What happens to your iman? Right? And that's very dangerous. And this is what happens with many people with religious authorities, right? That they build their religion on somebody. So what happens if that person turns out to be a fake, turns out to be a cheat, turns out to be an oppressor, an abuser, or turns out to be wrong, or they drift? I was in Europe this summer, and there's a number of people who are shaken. Alhamdulillah, the main person there was a solid guy. They were following a teacher who left Islam for a while. But alhamdulillah, they had somebody in their community who was their the representative of that teacher, was a smart guy who identified that this guy is a bit of a flake and confused. So the harm was mitigated, but it shook a lot of people, right? And so taqleed in faith is very dangerous, right? And that's the locus of what we're looking at right now. Then there's taqleed that's in iman. In Islam, or which is the al-ilm al-bahith an ahkam al-Islam, is aqidah, is fiqh, right? Is fiqh. In fiqh, what's the ruling of taqleed? There's basically, you are 2 levels. You're either a mujtahid or a muqallid. There's 2 states. And there the governing principle is فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ. Ask the people of knowledge if you know not. إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Right? And there's the proofs for taqleed in a'mal. And there you're not allowed. Like if you have to figure out, okay, what do I do about, is this contract halal? Say, just figure it out yourself. No, لا يجوز. Right? So taqleed in aqidah, but of course in aqidah, what does taqleed relate to as well? We'll see in this line. إِذْ كُلُّ مَنْ قَلَّدَ فِي التَّوْحِيدِ. Right? And what's tawheed? وحد يوحد توحيدا, right? Is في إثباته وحدانية الله تعالى, right? That what is it? Why do you affirm the oneness of God? Like, why do you believe in Allah? That's what tawheed relates to. That's what taqleed relates to. Right? That لما تثبت وحدانية الله. لما تؤمن بالله, basically, right? That is the taqleed. But it does not mean that you come up with your own aqidah. لا أقلد فيما يحصل في يوم القيامة. I come up with my own theory about يوم القيامة. Does that make sense? No. Because can all of us sit down and figure out the whole, like, okay, what happens when we die? Can the average believer unpack everything. That, okay, this is what happens in the grave, and then there's resurrection, and then this, and this. People will be completely confused. So the majal of taqleed is, because what is meant by Tawhid? And we took the definition earlier, right? Right? Tawheed comes from wahada yuwahidu tawheedan. From, يعني, أثبت وحدانية الله تعالى. Right? That it's to affirm the oneness of God solely on the basis of following another. Why do you affirm that God exists? Why do you therefore believe in God? Because my dad says so. So why do you follow him? I have no clue. That's one thing. The other thing, before we read the section, is that there's a difference between, like, you can look at, there's taqleed or non-taqleed, right? So you can look at taqleed and non-taqleed as being A or B, right? Someone either does not know why they believe, or someone knows why they believe, right? That's one way of classifying taqleed, right? You either know why you believe or you don't. But then let's say that, just imagine that's Sidi Hamza, you don't know, you just believe because you are so impressed by Uncle Zain, right? So Uncle Zain is your role model in life. And you're a 14-year-old young Muslim, right? From a secular family. It's not you, you're role playing, okay? So you didn't know anything about Islam. You ran into Uncle Zain and you're like, I believe because Uncle Zain believes. But then after a while, yeah, you did believe because Uncle Zain believes, but he asks, but why do you follow him? He said, because what he's saying is true. Why? Because Uncle Zain. Okay, get over Uncle Zain. But would they have some notion that, well, because there has to be a God. Why does there have to be a God? So because he created this. Like, so you gain some level of understanding, right? So yes, even though the mabna of the i'tiqad, is a type of taqleed, but unless someone is totally unlearned, there would be some janib of understanding, even if it's implicit, of why I believe. That's still not a good state. They don't know clearly why they believe. That's the state of a lot of Muslims, right? And that's very dangerous in our communities. And if human beings were rational, right, you'd say that an immigrant community, they should only remain believers for 40 years. Because the second generation, once they grow up, if they don't know why you believe, why should you believe it? But thank God for ghafla, thank God for all kinds of hujub, of veils. So people kind of stay, people are also lazy. They're like, who wants to like go and really think, why do I believe? And like, come on, let's get on with life. That's mercy. Because people are too lazy to do anything. It's going to be embarrassing. Right? So these are all things that keep people within faith. But it's not a good place to be. We shouldn't. So Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi and others argued that most people have some degree of ma'rifah, they have some degree of awareness of why they believe. Even if it's implicit. And if you keep asking, no, explain it to me. Said, well, because of the Quran. But they can't explain it. So there's some level, so you can look at taqleed or non-taqleed. Is either A or B. So either someone knows why they believe or not, or you can see that there's a continuum. Someone has no clue why they believe, and then there's a minimum And we'll see what that minimum is. Right? Which is, in يجزم بقول الغير, if you are firm. So if the person leaves that belief, you wouldn't leave it. That's taqleed maqbool. And there's others who have something of an idea to where they have a clear idea. And then there's the one who knows the dalil, but just in summary, and then someone who knows بالدليل التفصيلي. And we'll also look, the author himself quotes, the ulama mentioned that there's 5 levels of yaqeen. There's 5 levels of yaqeen. Right? Which will be coming. Right? Someone believes in that, yes, Medina exists. The difference between their knowledge and the one who decides to go towards Medina. And then the one who decides to travel towards Medina. Then the one who can see Medina from the outskirts. As opposed to the one who's now entering Medina. As to the one who's walking in Medina and who knows it well. All of them know Medina, but the difference between the one who's heard about it and the one who now begins the journey. And the one who can see it from a distance. And the one who's now entering and the one who's there. They all know Medina, but at different levels. So we'll be coming to that. So theoretically, there was a difference about taqleed. The overwhelming majority of Ahl Sunnah said that Iman al-Muqallid sahih. Right? Some discount, but then there's 2 senses. Taqleed is either A or B. Someone's a muqallid or not a muqallid. Others said no, there's a continuum, and few believers are pure muqallids. That's to see, you see it as a continuum between taqleed and ma'rifah, and each has darajat. Right? So sometimes when people are talking about taqleed, one needs to just be clear. One, are we talking about taqleed in iman, or are we talking about taqleed in amal? And in iman, it only refers to belief in God himself, not in the details of iman. No one has to make their own ijtihad. What are the attributes of Allah? Right? And the ishkal is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us in the Quran, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا. Know, and ilm has to be certain. And how can you be certain of something unless you know why you affirm it with certitude, right? So there's a philosophical or dimension to this. That what is the nature of ilm? Because ilm is that which is certain. Then the other question, right? And so many verses in the Quran that call us to have nazar. أفلا ينظرون أفلا يتفكرون أفلا يتدبرون. Right? Throughout the Quran. So it's commanded to reflect on the reality of the existence of God, the creating of God, etc. So sometimes if you don't do that, then you don't have the faith that is commanded, therefore you're not a believer. But that's weak. That opinion was not accepted. Then they differed that, and we'll see that. So that's where the difference arises. That there are commands in the Quran. Is the iman sahih or not? Number one. So the hasil, as we will see, is the iman of the muqallid is sahih, lakinnahu asi. But there's a sinner. بِتَرْكِ النَّظَرِ. If they don't seek understanding of their faith, إِن كَانَتْ لَهُ أَهْلِيَةُ النَّظَرِ. If they're able to take the means of understanding why they believe. Right? So that because if someone did not have the opportunity to learn, they live in the middle of nowhere, but they just learned the basics of their deen, but they have no clue why, they just follow it. That's not a good state to be in. Right? because some missionaries come by, such a person is very susceptible for ihtizazul iman. They have iman, but it's qabil lizawal. And this is a very critical issue in our times, that while in many parts of the Muslim world, it was enough to just tell people this is what we believe. Yalla, i'mal. You don't really need to understand in detail why you believe and so on. But, in a protected society, you don't need to more than that. And then how do you cultivate faith? You cultivate faith, as we will see, by al-amal al-salih. But where the faith itself will be threatened, al-amal al-salih on its own is not going to address those threats. And one needs to have sufficient understanding and a sufficient inoculating principles, to instill a mani'iyya, an inoculating, preventative understanding that preserves the health of people's faith, right? And that's very important in our times, whether we live in predominantly non-Muslim, secular, materialist, non-Muslim societies, but in a global village, even in Muslim societies, right? That, just basic faith on its own is rarely sufficient. But understanding is not a substitute for taghdiyatul iman, right? Of inoculating faith, which, with cultivating faith, which is with righteous action. So he says, rahimahullah, in the 11th line, قال صاحب الجوهرة رحمه الله تعالى إذ كل من قلد في التوحيد إيمانه لم يخلو من ترديد. For all who merely follow in their affirmation of divine oneness, their faith will not be free of the susceptibility to doubt. قوله إذ كل من قلد إلى آخره علة لقوله وجب عليه أن يعرف إلى آخره. So this is the reasoning. Why do they need to know what is necessary for Allah? Because belief out of mere following, right, is susceptible to doubt. He doesn't give a formal definition of what is taqleed, right? Does he? Not immediately, right? So we have a taqleed lughatan, that's the lexical meaning of taqleed, and shar'an, right, is اتباع الغير, اتباع قول الغير is to follow the opinion of another من غير دليل, من غير دليل, without proof, or without من غير معرفة الدليل, right? And it's sort of implicit. And there's extensive discussion on this issue. So قال الشارح رحمه الله حاصل من حط عليه كلام الأشياخ. The summary of what? The discussions of the ulama reached on the issue is أن من عرف الله بالدليل ولو جمليا ولو لم يكن باصطلاح أهل الكلام فهو مؤمن اتفاقا. That whoever knows Allah Most High through proof, even if it be a summary proof, even if it's not expressed according to the terminology of the scholars of theology, they can't express it in sophisticated language, they're a believer by agreement. وَمَنْ عَرَفَ بِلَا دَلِيلٍ أَصْلًا. And whoever knows, أي من عرفه, أي من عرف الله سبحانه وتعالى, whoever knows Allah Most High, i.e. فيؤمن, فيثبت وحدانية الله سبحانه وتعالى ويقبلها بلا دليل, without any evidence, بل بالتقليد, but rather بمجرد الاتباع دون معرفة الدليل, by mere following without knowing why, ففيه ستة أقوال. الأول وهذا مرفوض لأبي هاشم الجبائي رئيس المعتزلة. For الجبائي, the head of the Mu'tazila, you know, وَنَقْلُهُ عَنْ أَهْلِ السُنَّةِ كَذِبٌ. And it being, this being a position within Ahl Sunnah is not correct. إِذْ إِيمَانُهُ غَيْرُ صَحِيحٍ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. That, this opinion is that the إيمانه أي إيمان المقلد, that the faith of the muqallid, of the one who just believes a mere following, is not valid in the hereafter. وَأَمَّا فِي الدُّنْيَا فَاتَّفَقُوا عَلَى إِيمَانِهِ. As for the dunya, they said, yes, we treat him as a believer. Right? Why? Because there's a worldly aspect of faith. Someone says they're a believer, they get married, you know, all the worldly ahkam apply, but in the akhirah, لِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ أَلْقَى إِلَيْكُمُ السَّلَامِ لَسْتَ مُؤْمِنًا. Because do not say to those who give you salam that you are not a disbeliever. So we take, but we'll see that this is not accepted. Right? الثاني هو صحيح إلا أنه عاص لترك النظر مطلقا. Second, that they're a believer but sinful for not knowing why they believe. Full stop. كان فيه أهلية النظر أم لا. Whether they had the capacity to reason or not. Right? Capacity or the opportunity. وكان, that's at number 2. Number 3, الثالث هو صحيح, that إيمان المقلد صحيح, that the belief, that the faith of the one who does taqleed is valid, إلا أنه عاص لترك النظر, except that they're sinful if they do not reason. إن كان فيه أهلية النظر, if they had the capacity to reason, either the personal capacity or the opportunity. They were able to learn, to study, to ask, etc. وَكَانَ مُتَمَكِّنًا مِنَ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. And there was the opportunity to come to know. Right? And this is the relied upon position. Right? هذا هو المعتمد. Opinion number 3. الرابع إن قلد معصوما كالقرآن والسنة فهو غير عاصٍ. If one follows that which is protected from error, the Quran and the Sunnah as a whole of the Prophet ﷺ, then they are not sinful. Otherwise, they're sinful. But the ulama said that opinion number 4, where acceptable, would go back to number 3. Why do you believe in Allah? Because of the Quran. Why? Because it has to be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? They can't explain why, but they're sure. Now, before we go to 5 and 6, which are far-fetched opinions, or they have a context, also another is both the nazar al-aqli, there's a rational proof, but also, for somebody, there are also personal proofs, right? Which is a dalilun imani. Someone says, أَنَا أَدْعُ اللَّهَ وَيَسْتَجِيبُ لِي فَأَعْرِفْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ مَوْجُودٌ. Now that, can you establish a proof again? That's a personal proof. It's not that satisfactory, but it could give someone conviction. Is that sufficient? Right? Believing in the Quran or the Sunnah, that, well, the Prophet, I believe in Islam because of the Prophet. Why because of the Prophet? Because he could only be from the Creator of the worlds. Why? I don't know. But and there is, as one of the great poets, وَمَنْ هُوَ الْآيَةُ الْعُظْمَى لِمُعْتَبِرٍ. You know, the Prophet is one of the great signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Right? And the fact that he was unlettered and, you know, and he never had, you know, a formal education, etc., etc., and he came with the likes of the Quran and said, it's a mu'jiza. It's a print, you know, his truth claim of prophethood affirms the existence of God, and that's a line of reasoning. But on its own, it would allow someone to be confused. It would allow someone to be confused. That's why ignorance itself, ignorance is like being naked, right? Like you're susceptible to all kinds of problems. It's much safer to be clothed, right? The fifth opinion, and this is not an actual opinion. Some of the people of the spiritual path mention this to make a point. It wasn't absolute, right? الخامس أن النظر حرام وهو مذهب غالب الصوفية فإنهم يقولون متى غاب حتى يستدل عليه ومتى خفي حتى تكون الآثار تدل عليه. Right? The fifth opinion is that engaging in reasoning is impermissible. You're reasoning out the existence of God is impermissible because, and that's the way of most of the people of spirituality, because they say, when was Allah ever absent? That we need to reason to establish His existence. And when was He hidden? Until His traces point to Him. Right? As one of the poets said, نحن في مذهب الغرام أذلة إن أقمنا على الحبيب أدلة. In the way of lovers, we are abased indeed if we have to prove that our beloved exists. Because كيف يظهر للعقول سواه? How can any other occur to intellects? وسناه كسى العوالم جملة. How can any other occur to intellects when his dazzling beauty has clothed all creation? كيف يحجبه شيء وهو الذي أظهر كل شيء. How could anything, as in the Hikmah of Ibn Ata'illah, how could anything veil Allah when He is the one who has manifested everything? كيف يحجبه شيء وهو أظهر من كل شيء. How could anything veil Him when He is more manifest than anything? But their point there is لكن القصد النظر المثير للشك. That someone has faith, so someone already believes. So instead of cultivating their iman, they're instead just thinking about faith rather than cultivating it. That's detrimental, right? Because if you look at the metaphor of marriage, Zubayr wants to marry Zubaydah, right? When should he think about, should I marry her or not? Before you marry her. But once you're in marriage, what are you doing now thinking, should I marry her? Is that a healthy thing to be doing? No, because you already got married. Now what do you need to do? You need to focus on strengthening the relationship, right? So similarly, you already believe. You ask somebody, do you have any doubts why you believe? No. You have any confusions? No. So what are you doing? I'm reading about atheism. Do you have any doubts, questions? No. So what happens? Someone goes from having a healthy faith to ithara to shukuk, right? To stirring up doubts where there is none. Right? Now, if someone wants to do it for a purpose, right, such as learning in order to be able to guide other people, then that makes sense. There's a purpose. Al-umuru bimaqasidiha. But just, I have a friend who decided to read half a dozen books on atheism. Why? Just to test my iman. I said, how many books have you read about iman itself? I said, none. I said, so what do you think you should do? So jazakallah khair for the advice. I said, no, I'm not giving any advice. I'm asking you a question. I said, I probably should study a little bit about my faith first before reading about. But the thing is, iman is a quality of the heart, and it's strengthened through righteous action. Right? So the nadar here, another is النظر العقلي المجرد. Right? 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 لا القلبي. Right? Right? As Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Shaghuri says in his Diwan, ترك العقل في هواك رجال ليس للعقل في سناك مجال ذاك عقل من الحدوث تبدى وعليه من الكثيف عقال. Right? That in your love, truly accomplished ones left behind their intellect. For before your beauty, the mind plays no part. Yeah? Before your beauty, the mind has no part. Zubaydah comes down, she's looking dazzlingly beautiful. What do you do at that moment? Say, you're beautiful. You don't say, it would appear that you have applied, that you took a shower and you did it. Like, is that the time to go into mental analysis? No, this is the time to experience. Right? Right? As one of the poets said, هذه أنوار ليلة قد بدت. Right? Right? So what do you do at that time? Right? ذاك عقل من الحدوث دبت. That intellect arises out of originatedness, and it is عليه من الكثيف عقال, and it's weighed down by forms, the كثائف الموجودات. لكن القوم منك فازوا بقرب. But your people, the people of closeness, فازوا منك بقرب. They succeeded from you with closeness. بأداء الفروض قاموا وقالوا. They fulfilled their obligations before you, and that's what they called to. Right? And then it's alluding to the hadith of how to draw closer to Allah. Right? So that's the point here. Right? That as another, and some people get confused with it just because they don't understand Arabic language. Ibn Mashi said, وَانْشُلْنِي مِنْ أَوْحَالِ التَّوْحِيدِ إِلَى فَضَاءِ التَّفْرِيدِ. Take me out from mere affirmation of divine oneness. Because the point of being a believer is not simply, I believe. That is, Tawheed is wahada, is to merely affirm. And that's like you're stuck. What are you doing? I'm figuring out, yes, I do believe. Yes, I do believe. Yes, I do believe. You're stuck. That's awhal al-tawheed. You're stuck in a bog. You're stuck. Yes, I believe. Yes, I believe. Like lish. Right? إلى فضاء التفريد, to the vast expansiveness of realizing the singularity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's the state of Sayyidina Bilal when he says, Ahadun, Ahad, the singular, the unique. Right? To go from mere affirmation to realization. That's the point of Iman. Anyway, so that's what's meant here. Right? So this opinion is not a distinct opinion from the others. This is just pointing to, don't get stuck with mere affirmation. And don't just busy yourself with the mind away from living and cultivating faith. Okay. السادس أن النظر شرط كمال. That النظر, of course, here is النظر العقلي. Right? They mean that rational, that reasoning is a condition for the perfection of faith. فمن كان فيه أهلية النظر ولم ينظر فقد خالف الأولى. So one able to reason but doesn't has left what was superior. And some of Ahl Sunnah said this, but some of it goes to what we mean by reason and how much do you need to know to leave taqleed and to have some level of knowledge of why you believe. And then Imam Sawi rahimahullah says, وَالْحَقُّ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْمُعَوَّلِ, the truth, which is what is relied upon, أَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنَ عَاصٍ بِتَرْكِ النَّظَرِ. The believer is sinful if they do not have some reason for why they believe, إِن كَانَ فِيهِ أَهْلِيَّةٌ, if they have the capability and the circumstance to believe. وَلَوْ جُمْلِيًّا, even if it be something basic. Then he says, وَعْلَمْ رحمك الله أنهم اختلفوا في الإيمان, that they differed. What is Iman? فقيل هو المعرفة. المعرفة أي إثبات أن الشيء حق. Right? It's mere affirmation. Right? So ma'rifah would be affirmation. That is mere affirmation. Is to say that A is B. So you say Allah exists. So you know, it's mere knowing. Right? It's mere affirmation. ورد وهذا بأن كثيرا من الكفار يعرفونه كما يعرفون أبناءهم كما ذكر الحق تبارك وتعالى. They know him as they know the real. It's like when the Prophet ﷺ visited the Jewish child who was on his deathbed. Right? And they were so impressed because this is when there's a lot of tension between the Jews of Medina and the Muslims. And they had attacked and harmed many a companion. And the Prophet ﷺ had been very patient. So the Prophet ﷺ told, he says, Ya ghulam, qul la ilaha illallah. Oh young boy, say la ilaha illallah. So the boy looked at his father, who did not believe. And the father said, Ati' Aba al-Qasim. Obey Abu al-Qasim. The father did not at least then believe. And the child said la ilaha illallah. And then soon after he died, the Prophet ﷺ, when he left, he said, Alhamdulillah alladhi anqadhahu min an-nar. Okay? But that knowing alone did not make the father a believer. Or this is the case with respect to Abu Talib. He had no doubt about the truth of the Prophet ﷺ. But mere knowing is not sufficient, as we'll see. فلو كانت المعرفة تستلزم الإيمان لكان كل من عرف أن الله تعالى واحد وسيدنا محمدا رسوله مؤمنا. Otherwise, anyone who knows that Allah is one and that our Master Muhammad is his messenger, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, would be a believer. وليس كذلك. And that's not the case. وهذا القول مكذوب على الأشعري. And the ascription of this opinion to Imam al-Ash'ari is a lie. It's a misquote. And some of the literalists falsely accused the Imam of Ahl Sunnah, Imam al-Ash'ari, with that opinion. Likewise, false claims have been made about Imam al-Maturidi, Abu Mansur, regarding this as well. وقيل, and this is al-Mu'tamad, this is a relied upon position. هو أي الإيمان حديث النفس. Right? التابع للمعرفة. It is the self-affirmation that, or the self-statement that comes after knowing. أي قول النفس آمنت وصدقت. It's like saying to yourself, I believe or I accept. So it's, what is Iman? It's to know something is true and then to have a self-confirmation. Right? It's a self-confirmation after affirming something true. So you know it to be true and then you confirm it to yourself. That's what saddaqa mean. Right? It's not simply to know that it's correct, but then to قول النفس آمنت, I believe. قبلت, صدقت. بعد المعرفة التي هي الجزم المطابق للحق عن دليل. Right? After knowing, which is the firm affirmation of something that corresponds to the truth with basis. Like an an dalil is, this is فلو كان حديث النفس تابعا للتقليد لكان مقتضاه أنه ليس بمؤمن. Right? And if one simply affirms based on taqleed, this would entail that the person is not a believer. And this is where sometimes theory and practicality don't match. If the human being were a rational animal only, nobody would believe anything unless they know why. Right? Let's say some random person named Abdul Karim. He says, there's an amazing new ice cream here in Mississauga. Right? It's the best tasting ice cream. Have you had it? No. Then why do you say it? Because taste is something like, says, no, but I heard it's really good. That makes no sense. But practically, we accept all kinds of things without knowing why. I'm certain of it. Why? Did so many people say it? No. Right? Similarly, a lot of people, we believe even if we don't know. Right? So while theoretically, someone we wouldn't expect them to believe without it, but al-waqi' is that people do. That people do. They have no clue why, but they do. And we accept that. ولكن قال المصنف رحمه الله, Imam al-Laqqani said, Imam Laqqani himself wrote 3 commentaries on Jawhara al-Tawhid. The largest is 2,400 pages. Umdatul Murid. And it's a great, great work. And his son wrote several commentaries. Because they used to teach it extensively. Each time they prepared notes for it and so on. And there's different audiences. It's like you have a first year textbook, second year textbook, third year textbook. Then you have a reference work, right? They serve along the same skeletal structure. لكن قال المصنف إن هذا التعريف للإيمان الكامل. This is a definition of complete faith. فالتابع للتقليد, the one who follows, who believes, فالتابع أي حديث النفس التابع. التابع أي فحديث النفس التابع. فالتابع أي حديث النفس التابع. Right? So the self-affirmation on the basis of mere taqlid, of mere following, iman, is also faith. إلا أنه غير كامل, but there's deficiency in it. Right? If you're able to reason and didn't do so, you disobeyed the divine command of فَعْلَمْ, know that there is no God but Allah. Right? And many other calls in the Quran. أو يقال إنه تعريف لأصل الإيمان, or this is a definition for the basis of faith. ويكون جاريا على أحد القولين, and this follows one of the 2 opinions المتقدمين of the previous opinions في المعرفة, regarding what does it mean to know. Right? The 2 opinions being that ma'rifah, knowing, is either an affirmation that corresponds to the truth on the basis of evidence, or it's simply an affirmation that corresponds to the truth. Right? And he gives both definitions at the bottom, and he mentions that he discussed it a few pages ago. Right? وهذا قول للأشعري. This is the opinion of Imam al-Ash'ari. That ma'rifah is simply to affirm that which corresponds to the truth. وأبي بكر الباقلاني, Imam Abu Bakr al-Baqillani, one of the great Imams of Ahl al-Sunnah, who died beginning of the 5th century, the year 403 after the Hijrah, and did incredible service both in Islamic theology and also in defending the Quran. He has a great, great work, surprisingly neglected, called Al-Intisaru lil-Quran, in 2 volumes, one of the earliest books published by my good friend Shaykh Iyad from Dar al-Fath. وأبي إسحاق الأسفرايني, another of the great theologians, also who died in the 5th century, 418 after the Hijrah. وجمهورهم, and the majority. That ma'rifah is to affirm, is an affirmation that corresponds to the truth, with or without evidence. And right? And there's a very nice discussion by Sidi Abdul Ghani Nabulsi. He has a work called Ra'ihatul Jannah, Sharh Ida'at al-Dujunna. And I'll share it in the. What happened to the. Sometimes we work at snail pace, guys. What happened to the Google Classroom thing? It's up. Are we using it? Okay, no. It's not. The idea wasn't decorative. It was to actually use it so that people can access it. We should be putting the resources up there. Someone should take responsibility for that. Anyways, Shaykh Abdul Ghani Nabulsi has a nice discussion. Basically, he said the common person has. He said, وقل أن يرى مقلدا في الإيمان بالله إذ كلام العوام في الأسواق محشو بالاستدلال بالحوادث عليه سبحانه. Because it says it's rare to find someone who has no understanding of why they believe. It says because the common person in the marketplace, their faith is full, their words are full of ways of reasoning for the existence of God. And part of it in Muslim societies is because people get brought up in a Muslim environment. God is central to people's consciousness. Allah ya'inak, may Allah help you. Allah ma'ak, may Allah is with you. All these different things, all the day-to-day expressions. If you consider, if you go to any Muslim country, even Muslims in Muslim countries, even secular people in Muslim countries, how often they mention God. And then you hang out in a non-religious environment, see how rarely do people mention God. Right? I used to teach English in Damascus, and these are like rich kids from Mezza, and even some of them, there are a couple of them who'd admit, I don't believe. But they mention Allah all the time, because that's just the context of society, right? But that's, so there's a nice quote there, right? 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 And this is part of the effort of generation after generation, right? That the religious vocabulary is very central to the languages of the Muslims, right? And these are, yani, and he gives many examples of that, right? So we don't doubt people's faith, right? But lack of understanding makes faith susceptible. Then he quotes, وقال سيدي محي الدين ابن عربي رحمه الله أقسام الإيمان خمسة. There's 5 levels of faith, right? And what's meant here is Ibn Arabi, Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Arabi al-Hatimi al-Ta'i, right? He's known as Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. The others, there's also Maliki jurist, Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. So he says there's 5 levels of Iman, right? And these are 5 levels of strength of affirming something, right? And we use the example of Medina, right? Someone believes Medina exists. Why? Because everyone talks about it. Do you know anything about it? No. Are you sure it exists? I have no doubt. Right? So, have you ever read about, do you know anything about Namibia? Have you seen it, read about it, anything? Have any proof for it? But do you think Namibia exists? Yeah. How do you know it exists? هكذا قالوا. Do you have any doubt that Namibia exists? No. Right? That's taqleed. هكذا قالوا. Okay? Right? إيمان تقليد. الأول إيمان تقليد وهو من يأخذ العقائد عن شيخ أو عن شخص وجزم بها من غير معرفة دليل. The iman of mere following, which is someone who takes beliefs from a scholar or a parent or somebody and affirms it unequivocally without knowing why it's so. الثاني إيمان علم. Faith based on knowledge. وهو معرفة العقائد بأدلتها. It is to know beliefs with their proofs. Why do you believe in the oneness of God? Well, I have some understanding of why. وَهَذَا مِنْ أَهْلِ عِلْمِ الْيَقِينِ. And this is the station of knowledge of certitude. علم اليقين. And they're درجات اليقين. وَكِلَا الْقِسْمَيْنِ صَاحِبُهَا مَحْجُوب. Both these levels, this person is veiled from Allah. They know about Allah, but they don't have any living consciousness of Allah. Based, and that's not a good place to be. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا آمِنُوا. Right? Oh, you believe, believe. أي قووا إيمانكم. Strengthen your faith. The Prophet said, جددوا إيمانكم. Renew your faith. الإيمان يبلى. Faith gets worn out. Right? Etc. الثالث وإيمان عيان. The third is faith with beholding. وهو معرفة الله تعالى بمراقبة القلب. This to be معرفة الله, right, is to have conscious knowledge of Allah. So you don't merely affirm, but you have a degree of consciousness. How? بمراقبة الله, by having mindfulness of Allah. فلا يغيب ربه عن خاطره طرفة عين. This, of course, and these are darajat. And someone may wink in and out of this state. This could be a hal or a maqam. It could be a state which comes and goes, or a station. That one is firm-footed in it. Right? بل هيبته في قلبه كأنه يراه. Rather, one's state of awe of Allah is as though one beholds Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وهو مقام المراقبة وعين اليقين. And this is the state of vigilance and certitude itself. Now, of course, Ibn Arabi sort of wants to give a high-level dig and rip that having presence of heart with Allah is very basic faith. It's very basic faith. That this is, you're just one step ahead of being heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't think that's such a big deal. Right? Because and he has a very devastating treatise called مَا لَا يُعَوَّلُ عَلَيْهِ. That which is not relied upon. Because a lot of people, they get a little bit religious, they pray, they feel really happy. I had some presence of heart. This is nowhere near what the Prophet ﷺ called to. And that's why Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib was asked to describe the prayer of the Prophet by day. I said, none of you can do that. Because the prayer of the Prophet ﷺ during the day is not just what he prayed, but how he prayed. He said, أَيُّكُمْ يُطِيقُ ذَلِكَ? Which of you could do that? He says, instead, I'll tell you when he prayed and how much he prayed. And then he described that. Right? And it's there in the works of Shama'il. I recall this from Al-Anwar fi Shama'il Mukhtar by Al-Baghawi. So this is the station of being watchful of Allah. And this is, so there's ilm al-yaqeen, there's level 2, there's ayn al-yaqeen. This is the essence of certitude. Right? One is certitude just based on knowledge. You know it's true. The other is ayn al-yaqeen. You have the essence of certitude. Right? Or conscious certitude. Ayn, there's two meanings of ayn. One is, this is the essence of certitude. This is al-yaqeen nafsuhu, or it is conscious certitude. But still not quite, nowhere near perfection. وَالرَّابِعُ وَإِيمَانُ حَقٍّ. Realized faith. وَهُوَ رُؤْيَةُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى بِقَلْبِهِ. This is beholding Allah with one's heart. وَهُوَ مَعْنَى قَوْلِهِ. And this is أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. Is to worship Allah as though you behold Him. وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. And He is with you wherever you may be. In إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا. Right? And the spiritual path can be argued from me, إِنِّي ذَاهِبٌ إِلَى رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينَ. I'm going to my Lord, He will guide me. To هُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. So you know it, but you're still in a degree of absence from Him. هُوَ مَعَكُمْ, third person. To إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا. Indeed, Allah is with us. Right? وهذا معنى قولهم العارف يرى الله في كل شيء. Right? That the one who knows Allah beholds Him in everything. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات. Right? Right? لأولي الألباب. Right? Right? وهو مقام المشاهدة. This is the station of beholding Allah. وحق اليقين. And حق اليقين, this is the realization of certitude. This is true certitude or the realization of certitude. وصاحب هذا المقام والذي قبله يستدل بالحق على الخلق. And this is the living faith sought by the people of the spiritual path. Right? 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 Because Allah is more real than the creation. Now that's rationally true as well. The necessary existent is more real than the merely possible existent. So, reality 101 would entail affirming the absolutely real. Everything else is only relatively real, so you affirm the necessary existent, and then you affirm the merely possibly existent by that it only exists because the necessary existent originated it and is sustaining it. نعمتان لا ينفك عنهما موجود قط. Right? Two encompassing blessings that no existent thing is bereft of. نعمة الإيجاد, the blessing of origination. ونعمة الإمداد, and the blessing of being sustained at every moment. كلا نمد, all do we sustain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran. هؤلاء وهؤلاء, these and those. من عطاء ربك, from the giving of the grace of your Lord, of your caring Lord, etc. Right? What needs proof is, prove to me all this exists. Right? And generally people stop at this level. But even this, right? There's more to it than this, because the journey to Allah is never ending. يعني إذا أرادت همة السالك عندما كشف إليها نادته هواتف الحقيقة إنما نحن فتنة فلا تكفر والذي تطلبه أمامك, أو كما قال that if the spiritual resolve of the ones journeying to Allah ever wishes to stop at the spiritual experiences that they've had, the voices of spiritual realities call out to them. It's as if they call out to them. Right? Don't stop. What you seek is ahead of you. We are but a test. إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ فِتْنَةٌ. Paraphrasing what the two angels said. We are but a test. Disbelieve not. I mean, don't give up on your seeking. Right? وَالْخَامِسِ إِمَامُ حَقِيقَةٍ. Faith that is fully realized. وَالْفَنَاءُ بِاللَّهِ عَمَّا سِوَاهُ, is to be extinguished in Allah from all besides. وَالسُّكْرُ بِحُبِّهِ, and to be completely intoxicated in His love. فَلَا يَشْهَدْ إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ, so one beholds only Him. كَمَنْ غَرِقَ فِي بَحْرٍ, as one drowned in an ocean. وَلَمْ يَرَ لَهُ سَاحِلًا, and does not see the shore. وَهَذَا لَيْسَ لَهُ دَلِيلٌ وَلَا مَدْلُولٌ. Right? Such a person, like someone's in the ocean, say, prove to me, like someone's immersed in the ocean, say, prove to me that the ocean exists. Okay? Right? فالواجب على الشخص أحد القسمين الأولين. What is required for a person is one of the first two levels. وأما الثلاثة الأخر فعلوم ربانية يخص بها الحق تبارك وتعالى من يشاء. What's required for the person is either to have sound beliefs by accepting these beliefs, or sound beliefs accompanied by knowledge. But knowledge on its own will only get you to very basic faith. You know and you understand why you know. But faith is only that which is lived. So the third level is faith with consciousness of Allah, muraqabah, with mindfulness, vigilance, consciousness that فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ, that Allah beholds you. The fourth level is كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ, as though you behold him. And then there are degrees of realization of that, right? And the subject matter of this is the works of spirituality, but he talks about them here. And some scholars don't like the commentary of Imam Sawi because saying you're mixing two. This is spirituality, this is not theology. But the counter argument, no, the whole point of belief is realization, right? Right? And of course, if I didn't believe, right? And then it says, فَإِذْ كُلُّ مَنْ تَقَلَّدَ فِي التَّوْحِيدِ إِيمَانُهُ لَمْ يَخْلُ مِنْ تَرْدِيدٍ. Their faith will not be free of doubt, أي ترديد وشك وتحير، أي من قابلية الترديد، right? من قابلية الترديد، right? Susceptibility to accepting doubt, because actual doubt is kufr. A doubt which you accept, say I no longer know if I believe, that's not belief anymore, right? Al-Maqqari's work إضاءة الدجنة, which was written at the same time or the same age as Jawhara al-Tawhid, and I still haven't ascertained which came first. He has a really nice quote. We'll also post it in the forum. Inshallah, we'll populate the actual. He says, وَذُو احْتِيَاطٍ فِي أُمُورِ الدِّينِ مَنْ فَرَّ مِنْ شَكٍّ إِلَى يَقِينِ. A person of caution in matters of religion is one who flees from doubt to certitude. And this is a beautiful principle in life. وَذُو احْتِيَاطٍ فِي أُمُورِ الدِّينِ مَنْ فَرَّ مِنْ شَكٍّ إِلَى يَقِينِ. A person of caution in matters of religion is one who flees from doubt towards certitude. وَمَنْ لَهُ عَقْلٌ أَبَى عن شرب ما لم يصف مذ ألف زلالا شبما. And a person of intelligence is one who refuses to drink anything impure when they have access to pure and pleasing water. Right? If you have pure water, would you drink dirty water? No. فبان أن النظر المؤصل أول واجب كما قد أصل. So it is clear then that structured reasoning is the first obligation, as has been affirmed with principle. Right? Who a sane person would not accept drinking impure water if pure water is available. So if pure water is available, faith that does not have the impurities of confusion and doubt, then only a fool would accept the lesser when the greater is available. The Ida'at to the Junnah is 500 lines. It covers the same themes as the Jawhara, but in some places they still teach it, like in Mauritania, etc. So Sheikh Salik bin Siddina, for example, in the Bay Area, he teaches the text of Jawhara al-Tawhid, then they read Ida'at to the Junnah. There's a couple of Mauritanian commentaries on it as well. Elsewhere in Sham and elsewhere, they don't teach it, but the Mashayikh encouraged reading it, and there's a few commentaries. There's one of these Shinqiti commentaries, one of the Mauritanian commentaries, and there's a few others. Ilish, the great Maliki jurist, has a commentary on it, and most notably, Sheikh Abdul Ghani Nabulsi has a beautiful commentary on it called Ra'ihatul Jannah. So that's the line on taqleed. Then he says, فَفِيهِ بَعْضُ الْقَوْمِ يَحْقِ الْخُلْفَ وَبَعْضُهُمْ حَقَّقَ فِيهِ الْكَشْفَ فَقَالَ إِنْ يَجْزِمْ بِقَوْلِ الْغَيْرِ كَفَى وَإِلَّا لَمْ يَزَلْ فِي الضَّيْلِ. So قَوْلُهُ يَحْقِ الْخُلْفَ. So some people relate that there's difference of opinion about the matter of belief, and others uncovered the issue and said, if they affirm what the other says decisively, it's sufficient. Otherwise, they remain in harm. I only believe if he believes. So what if he becomes a Buddhist tomorrow? I don't know what I'm going to do. That's a serious problem. يحكي الخلفة أي الخلاف وأصل الخلف يكون في خلف الوعد. So here خلف is referring to khilaf. Right? They relate difference. وبعضهم أي بعض القوم بعض علماء هذا الفن, some of the scholars of this subject, وهو التاج السبكي. Right? There's two great, the Subkis were a great family of scholars. There's Taqiyuddin al-Subki, who was the father. Ali ibn Abdul Kafi, and his son Tajuddin al-Subki, Abdul Wahhab ibn Ali. Right? They're both great scholars. So, حيث جعل الخلاف اللفظيا. He said that there's no difference between those who said that taqleed is not enough and taqleed is sufficient. He said there's actually no difference. Why? قوله حقق فيه الضمير يعود على التقليد. He clarified regarding the issue of mere following. الكشف أي الإيضاح. He clarified it. الألف فيه للإطلاق جامعا بين الكشف بين القول بالإجزاء وعدمه. Because he clarified when is taqleed sufficient. So the faith of the one of taqleed, of mere following, is fine. And when it's insufficient, so the one who merely follows, it would not be fine. قوله فقال أي قال السبكي رحمه الله قوله أن يجزم أي المقلد أن يصمم اعتقاده بحيث لو رجع مقلده لم يرجع. Right? إن يجزم بقول الغير كفى. If they affirm what the person they're following affirms with certitude. So someone, I'm Muslim because my parents are Muslim. So what if they left? If someone would remain Muslim, that taqleed, though falling short of what is better, is sufficient. But if someone only believes because someone else believes, or a similar situation, my maternal grandmother's older sister had this Sri Lankan servant. I've never seen someone who prayed as much as this lady. Like, she cleaned the room, she'd pray 2 rak'ahs. It's like almost like a joke, but like really pious. She'd be doing dhikr and humming salawat. When brooming the house, you'd see her praying in the kitchen. It's like, whoa. Then she was going to Sri Lanka, I said, and her family was like Buddhist or whatever. I said, isn't it tough to go back home? You know, like, because she'd talk about her family and they didn't like. So no, it's very simple. If you're amongst the Muslims, you worship Allah. When you're with your Buddhist family, you do what they do. That's the harm of taqleed. You have no clue why you believe. بقول الغير قوله بقول الغير المراد بالغير الشخص الذي قلده. If they're firm on the opinion of the other, meaning the one followed, في العقائد من غير معرفة دليلها, without knowing the basis of following. كفى قوله كفى أي كفاه في العقائد. This would be sufficient in beliefs. وإلا لم يزل في الضير. Otherwise one remains in harm. أي في ضرر الشك, in the harm of doubt. And of course, doubt here is قابلية الشك, right? Right? The susceptibility to doubt, because actual doubt is not sufficient. فتحصل أن الحق الذي عليه جميع أهل السنة. The summary is that the true position that all of أهل السنة is upon, أن إيمان المقلد صحيح, that the faith of the one merely following is sound. إلا أنه يكون عاصيا بترك النظر إن كان فيه أهلية له. So the part that is agreed upon is still here. Okay? يعني? Okay. So we need to be clear about something. الذي عليه جميع أهل السنة أن إيمان المقلد صحيح. Full stop. إلا عند الأكثر, the position of the majority is أنه يكون عاصيا, except that they're sinful. This is the majority of أهل السنة said this, not all of them. Okay? So they agree that the iman of the muqallid is sahih, unless we mean by taqleed that you'd follow the person you're following, whether they believe or disbelieve. Right? That's not really iman. Right? إلا أنه يكون عاصيا, except that they would be sinful بترك النظر, by not knowing why they believe, إن كان فيه أهلية له, if they know why they believe. والحال أن اعتقاده جازم, and the state is that they believe with firm belief. This is the summary. بحيث لا يرجع برجوع مقلده, such that one wouldn't leave faith if the one that they're following leaves faith. وقال الغزالي, this is a beautiful quote. قال الإمام الغزالي رحمه الله: أسرفت طائفة بتكفير عموم المسلمين. A group, meaning of theologians, were excessive by بتكفير بقول ما يلزم منه التكفير, by saying that which would entail deeming the majority of the believers to be disbelievers. وزعموا أنه من لم يعرف في العقائد الشرعية بالأدلة التي حرروها فهو كافر. And who imagine, and زعم يطلق غالبا على القول الموافق للصواب. زعم is usually used for an opinion that goes against what's correct. زعم الذين كفروا أن لن يبعثوا. Those who disbelieve imagine, meaning falsely, that they won't be resurrected. For example, that they imagine that whoever doesn't know the principles of belief with the proofs that they have mentioned, and the reason that they have mentioned, because the whole range of ways of affirming divine oneness, that they're a kafir. فضيقوا رحمة الله تعالى الواسعة. So they have limited the vastness of Allah's mercy. وجعلوا الجنة مختصة بجماعة يسيرة من المتكلمين. And they have made paradise restricted to a small group of theologians. Okay? In another, and this is, he quotes it indirectly, but it's mentioned elsewhere. وَجَعَلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَقْفًا خَاصًا. They made paradise a private endowment. لطائفة يسيرة من المتكلمين أمثالهم. For a small group of theologians who think the way they do. That even other scholars they would reject, say not them. Right? And this is غرور. Right? This is delusion. أما من عنده شك أو وهم أو تردد فهو كافر إجماعا. As for the one who has doubt or delusion or wavers about belief, they are a disbeliever by consensus. Right? But this is in قبل ذلك الشك. Right? Right? If they accept it, right? Because we're not responsible for our thoughts. We have al-khatir la taklifa fihi. Then you have al-khatir, al-taraddud, al-mail, thought, a bad idea, an idea comes, even bad. We're not responsible for it. Even when you consider it, there's no responsibility. Even when you incline towards it, I'm not sure. Said, have you accepted that you're not sure? No, I'm yani, the yani stage. We would, if it was up to us, we'd kick pretty much everyone out of Iman. But it's not up to us. Alhamdulillah. Allah is, but the male, there's also, is only when there's jazm or azm, would affirm something. That you say, yes, that I don't know anymore. I have doubts. But doubts, one is doubts come to you. Someone says, I have doubts. Don't say, yes, you're kafir now. No. Rather, what do we say? Yes, but you believe. Say, yeah. So, okay, this is how you deal with your doubts. You don't say, yeah, okay. Oh, you're not a Muslim anymore. No. Because that's why, like, telling everyone, get out of here, right? And that's not proper, right? So people who are struggling with that, you ask them a simple question, and a lot of people come up with these kinds of things. You ask them, do you consider yourself Muslim? Yes. And depending on the person, say, yeah, but I'm confused. So okay, then we can deal with your confusion. You tell them, well, then you're not a Muslim. So, okay, let me just walk away. And the only reason they're bringing up that I have doubts is why? Consciously or unconsciously, what are they seeking? They want to have certitude. Right? That's why the Prophet said, yes, make things easy, do not make them hard. Right? Bashiru wa la tunaffiru. Encourage people. Do not cause them to turn away. Someone's, maybe struggling in the water. You don't say, you're drowning, and we put our foot on their head and press down till they die. Yes, it's a bad place to be. Help them out. And sometimes those doubts are the best things that happen to them, because then they value their faith. It's an opportunity for them to renew their faith. Right? Right? Inkisaru al-aasi ahabbu ila Allah min sawlati al-muti'. The brokenheartedness of the sinner is more beloved to Allah than the haughtiness of the obedient. Right? As Abu Madian says in his hikam. Right? And it's not a hadith Qudsi, but it's related. Right? And they're true words. That أَنَا عِنْدَ الْمُنْكَسِرَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ مِنْ أَجْلِي. I am with those who are brokenhearted for my sake. Right? So, right? And those are great spiritual opportunities. And if someone's calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one has to be aware of that. وُرُودُ الْفَاقَاتِ أَعْيَادُ الْمُرِيدِينَ. The times of distress are the festival seasons for those seeking Allah. Because before, someone was just living what's called BGL, blissful ghafla life. Right? Right? They're blogging. Blissful ghafla whatever. Yeah. Blissful life of ghafla. Blog. Right? They're just blogging along. Right? Then suddenly they get confused. Right? Now's the time to realize, oh my God, I got to take my faith seriously. Wurudul faqat, a'yadul muridin. This is the time to help them reconnect with Allah. It's to take them by the hand, not to wag your finger at them. So we're going to pause and pray and then continue, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So we'll be back in 7 minutes, inshallah, for those of you who are online. Right, so let's just close. He says, كَمَنْ يَقُول المسلمون لهم دين والنصارى مثلا لهم دين والله أعلم بمن هو على الحق. So the Muslims have one belief and the Christians have another belief and Allah knows who's on the truth. No, in matters of belief one has to be certain that what we affirm is the truth. And then he'll say, how does one strengthen faith? So, and we'll look at that and then pause بإذن الله تعالى. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Rasulullah wa alihi wa man wala. To continue, قال الإمام الصاوي رحمه الله تعالى: واعلم أن ثمرة الإيمان فعل الطاعات فمن آمن ولو بالتقليد وأكثر من الطاعات نور الله سبحانه وتعالى قلبه. It says, know well that the fruit of faith is acts of obedience. And what is a ta'a? A ta'a is فعل العبد الموافق لأمر ربه. That's a ta'a. يعني is فعل العبد الموافق لأمر ربه. Right? And there's some designated ta'at, but a'ada can be a ta'a if it's done within the limits of Allah, in a manner pleasing to Allah, seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thereby. Right? So whoever believes, even if it be by mere following, but then engages in a lot of acts of devotion, Allah illuminates their heart. Right? فلربما رقاه إلى تلك المراتب التي تقدم ذكرها. And Allah may raise them up, right, in those ranks that have been mentioned before, right? Right? So, as they said, إذا طلع الصباح أغنى عن المصباح. When the sun rises, the lamp, it frees you of need of the lamp, right? فإذا شمس المعارف ظهرت, you have the knowledge. وأما مخالفة الله تعالى فلا تفيد إلا الوبال. As for the disobedience to Allah, it results only in loss and woe. وَلَوْ لِلْعَالِمِ بِالْأَدِلَّةِ. Even for the one who knows with proof. لِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Do you not see the one who takes their own whim as God? وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ. And Allah allows them to go astray despite knowledge, right? And you can see the rest of the verse from Surah Al-Jathiyah, verse 23. And that's very, Alama al-Jurdani, in his sharh on the Arba'in al-Nawawiyah, Al-Jawahir al-Lu'lu'iyah, mentions in the hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, right, that that of the one who is حتى ما يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع, that is from the rahmah of Allah that many a person is guided to the truth without any apparent reason. Right? They're just like doing their own thing, and someone had a dream, someone stumbled upon somebody. One of the great female scholars of our time, she became Muslim because she used to be a Buddhist da'iyah. And everyone would believe except for the Muslims and the Arabs. She's like, I'm going to show them. So she went to Egypt. She was studying at Berkeley just to refute them. What's wrong with these people? Why don't they believe? And she's got should have made a really good boxer because she's got a tough personality. But an amazing person. Sheikh Hidayah Hartford. She's got a number of published books, and she does online counseling and stuff as well. And she became Muslim. And her intent was to refute. Right? But he said it's rare for someone to lose Iman unless there's an underlying cause. And inevitably, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not take the blessing either, unless typically there's either dhulm or التعدي بالمعصية. أي معصية وراء معصية وراء معصية. But even that, ويعفو عن كثير, and he overlooks much. But again and again, when you see people who are having intellectual doubts and so on, just look at their lifestyle. What happened? Yes, there's an outward, I'm having doubts about this and that, but you see what happened? They moved away from good company. They left doing what they were doing before of the good. They started busying themselves in harmful things. They started committing sin. They started engaging in wrong. But typically the two major causes of ضعف الإيمان are ظلم, because الظلم ظلمات يوم القيامة. Darknesses, wrongdoing becomes darknesses on the Day of Judgment. And number two is التعدي بالمعصية, which is either الإصرار على الصغائر أو ارتكاب الكبائر, is to become habituated to doing small sins دون توبة, right, without repentance and remorse, or committing enormities. And of course, and many of these are matters of the heart. And that's the importance of Islamic spirituality. See, that Al-Hasan al-Shadli says, من لم يتغلغل في علمنا هذا مات مصرا على الكبائر وهو لم يشعر. Whoever doesn't become deeply immersed in this knowledge of ours, knowledge of the purity of the heart, dies committing enormities and they have no clue. You know, they're on this whirlwind thing of how great am I, but that's the state of shaitan. أنا خير منه, I'm better than them. I know more and I do more and I more and I. That's like Fir'aun in a believer's garment, right? ولربما يظلم قلبه وتلتبس عليه الأدلة حتى لا يدري أين يتوجه, right? And it may well be that such a person, their heart is darkened and even the proofs themselves become confusing to them, so they don't know where they're directed. وقد حكي أن الفخر, this is Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, and this is hikayah, these are mentioned for the purpose of making a point, right? حين احتضرته الوفاة, when he was on his deathbed, وردت عليه شبه, said points of rational objections came to him, عجز عن دفعها, that he wasn't able, due to his weak physical state, he couldn't sit down and reason it out. فصار يقول اللهم إيمانا كإيمان العجائز, oh Allah, faith like the faith of elderly women who have complete certitude, but they're very simple people, right? وحكي عن ابن العربي, it's related, and this of course this is في خيال بعضهم, in someone's imagination, because they didn't meet their, that it's stated أنه في تلك الحالة كان واقفا في الصلاة, that at that moment when Al-Fakhr al-Razi had those questions that came to him, Ibn Arabi was in his prayer, فضرب برجله مرارا, he hit the ground several times with his foot. فسئل عن ذلك, and he was asked about that. فقال إن الفخر احتضرته الوفاة, that Fakhr al-Din al-Razi was on the verge of dying. فاحتوشته الشياطين, so the shayateen came around him, يريدون نزع إيمانه, seeking to lift his faith. فضربتهم برجلي, and I struck them with my foot. فمات على الإيمان والحمد لله, and he died on faith walhamdulillah. Shaykh Abdul Fattah Bizm said, not mentioning this kind of thing may have been better, but these are sometimes, so particularly in the Eastern tradition, this particularly in some of the Persian poetry, they took Fakhr al-Din al-Razi as a metaphor for the theologian. But, and that's one of the ways of poetry, right? Like it's not, ليس المقصود هو, right? But this, they use it as a metaphor. There's a poet and there's a saint. There's a, not of the theologian. There's a theologian and then there's the saintly, the godly person. Between the person whose mind is in rational matters and the one who's spiritually realized. And this, of course, this is a metaphor. If you read the writings of Al-Fakhr al-Razi, his tafsir bears witness to the depth of his spiritual insight. And a number of people have actually written works, I have a couple, at least two of them, on the spiritual teachings of Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. And if you read what he has to say about akhlaq, of ilm al-akhlaq, and of the states of the heart, and if you read his work on the Asma'ullahi al-Husna, etc., you realize that this is, but sometimes people talk about archetypes. They're not talking about a person. So that's how we understand that. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala alam. Then we will stop at line number 14. وَاجْزَمْ بِأَنَّ أَوَّلًا مِمَّا يَجِبْ مَعْرِفَةٌ وَفِيهِ خُلْفٌ مُنْتَصِبٌ. This is the issue of what's the first thing that is obligatory to know. Right? And here we look at that and then we'll see بإذن الله تعالى the various definitions of how you come to beautiful discussions on how we come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's some beautiful quotes there, and how we reflect, and there's some beautiful examples. And we'll also see a brief discussion on Ayat al-Nur, Allahu Nuru Samawati wal-Ard, and some of the thing of many points of reflection. So this, he expands on this, and it's a beautiful thing of how do you cultivate, how do you come to have clear affirmation of divine oneness. And this is a beautiful discussion in the Sharh of Imam Sawi. So we look at that, and then he goes to these memorable lines: فانظر إلى نفسك ثم انتقدي للعالم العلوي ثم السفلي تجد به صنعا بديع الحكم لكن به ما دليل العدم. So look to yourself, then the higher and lower worlds, you'll find in them a creation of marvel and perfection. Yet within it lies the proof of its nothingness. إذ كل ما جاز عليه العدم عليه قطعا يستحيل القدم. Because anything for which it is possible not to exist, it could not possibly be eternal. And then he looks at some of the foundational proofs of divine oneness, and then he goes on to starting then to talk about what we believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll pause here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. That's what we're doing for today. والحمد لله.
Is what strengthens your iman. So I just wanted to know.
So that is?
The ilm mukashafa is ilm mu'amala and ilm mukashafa.
Yeah.
And then he said that the ahya that the Ghazali cannot talk about ilm mu'amala, not mukashafa.
Yeah.
And then he said the ilm mu'amala is mukashafa is something that you experience and is what it strengthens your iman.
Yeah.
That's what I understood.
Yeah. No, so Imam Ghazali focuses on what's called tasawwuf amali. Right? That to seek Allah, you got to work. And by working on yourself, your heart will be opened to knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one method of Islamic spirituality. That's certainly Imam Ghazali. And here and there, he goes into it. You open Kitab al-Shukr, and here and there, Imam al-Ghazali kind of opens up. So there are these ishraqat here and there. But there's another method, which is the other way around. That talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and focus on knowing Allah, and the change will follow. And that's certainly the way of, so there's tariq al-mujahada, which is the way of Imam al-Ghazali, called it tariq al-mujahada or tariq يعني العمل التصوف العملي, and then there's the يعني طريق يعني طريق يعني الشكر or طريق المكاشفة, which is know Allah first and then act. Okay? So you see, for example, if you look at the hikam of Ibn Ata'illah and make a list of everything he tells you to do, he doesn't talk about anything. How much does he talk about the nafs? Like, because he does actually, but it's about, he said, turn to Allah. And these are the means. للوسائل حكم. You need both. You need to know why you're working on yourself, and you need to work on yourself. You need both, right? And these are different. So there's different spiritual methods, but both required. You need to know وَأَنَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ الْمُنْتَهَى. Right? لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. So there's the goal and there's the means. Right? إِذْ لَوْلَا الْوَاسِطَةِ لَذَهَبَ كَمَا قِيلَ الْمَوْسُوطِ. Were it not for the means, the end would never be attained. But لِلْوَسَائِلْ حُكْمُ الْغَايَاتِ means take the ruling of ends. If you don't know why you're doing it, you're not going to do it. خلاص. So one needs, a true spiritual path has both. There's a clear sense of what you're working to, and there's a focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the akhirah. And there is an active taking of means. People who just talk about spiritual realities, but they don't do anything about it, that's haki. Right? That's just kalam. Right? And right? 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 But at the same time, acting without purpose won't get you anywhere. Any other questions, inshallah? Go ahead. Please, it's right behind you.